Welcome everybody back to Friar Talk. Today we're going to be doing our regular season, kind of a recap, wrap up. Going to be going over just kind of our grades overall. And then later on today, we're going to have another video out to preview this Padres Mets playoff series, which we are very, very hyped about. I'm actually going to be going on to Friday's game, hopefully just Friday and Saturday for in a positive way. But today we're just going to go over this regular season first. Kind of go over what our predictions were heading into the year, looking back on that a little bit, kind of revisiting it just because I think 2021 our predictions were a little off. We were pretty high on the Padres, and then they completely died on us. But this year we were pretty close, I think, with where we thought this team was going to be. And yes, we didn't get Fernando back, which was a big part of our predictions heading into the year, but you look at the swing that the Padres had at the deadline, and I feel like at least name value that's very similar for like getting the Fernando production like for half a season. So I think with that said, let's get into this regular season wrap up. Overall, I mean, this was a great season because we got to see, this is the first full season playoff berth that I've watched in my life. Now I think it was like 2006 was the last one. And I don't remember that at all. But 2020, that was a pretty exciting time, even though it's a 60-game season that the Padres made the playoffs. So I'm super pumped that they're going to make the playoffs, that they have made the playoffs this year. Max Scherzer, we got some tough matchups against the Mets, but overall, this regular season was a big success. I know that we were a couple kind of down spots. I would say maybe late August, early September. It didn't look that great, and the Padres are really struggling to get along. And it was like, oh no, are they going to fall off again? And then they kind of turn it up, especially when the schedule got tough later on in the season. But looking back to where our predictions were last year, Chase isn't here today, but Chase, Isaac, and I, we couldn't find the exact win totals that we picked, but we were all between, I believe it was 88 and 92 wins. I had the Padres in second place. Isaac did not. But we were pretty close, I actually want to say, because the Padres are finishing this year with 89 wins. So they fall in that range that we all had. But I think that overall, I think our big thing like heading into the season was the starting pitching has to deliver. And it did. That's one of the biggest reasons for why the Padres in this playoffs, because it was able to take a lot of strain off the bullpen, where last year you saw the bullpen fall apart. And I would honestly, I feel like, I don't know what the exact numbers are, how they stack up. I feel like last year's offense was a little bit better, though, in terms of, I mean, that's because of Fernando. But this year was the pitching, and I think the starting rotation being able to pitch deep in the games was one of the biggest differences. So that's kind of my initial kind of recap of this season. But Isaac, you want to get into where you kind of thought this team was going to be and the overall thought right now on after the season's over?
Yeah, I mean, you brought it up. The main thing about the whole season was keep afloat until Fernando comes back. And that was kind of my whole kind of thought coming into the season, was just stay around 500, hopefully above 500 until Fernando comes back. And when Fernando comes back and after the trade deadline, everything's going to look good for the Padres. And, I'll get into what I think of this Padres team later, but I just want to go over what we thought coming into the season. We all knew the pitching was going to have to hold it down, and for the most part, they honestly really did. You look at the pitching rotation this year. It started Yu Darvish, Shamana, Joe Musgrove. Who was the fourth at the time? I don't remember, but it was supposed to be Mike Clevenger, and then Blake Snell was fifth because he had to get his season ramped up.
Gore for a while.
Oh yes, Mackenzie Gore took over from the spot for Mike Clevenger, because Mike Clevenger was, I believe, supposed to come in, and even Snell as well. So Mackenzie Gore was in the rotation for a while. This rotation held it down for a really long time.
I was going to say Nick Martinez, too. I totally blanked, too.
That's correct. Nick Martinez was the fifth in place of Blake's. So if I remember correctly, Mackenzie Gore was in place of Blake Snell, and Nick Martinez was in place of Mike Clevenger. That's what it was. Okay. They did really well. Honestly, they surpassed my expectations in terms of this Padres team has to pitch and play great defense and hope they can just win doing that. And at one point, there were 20 plus games above 500 and in first place doing just that. Now, towards, after that, it was sort of a little bit of a downward spiral, but we kind of knew that they weren't going to be able to sustain that kind of pace without the production of somebody like Fernando. And yes, I kind of think in a way maybe the offense was a little better last year, but that's because you had somebody hitting 43 home runs, 42 home runs, whatever it is, in 130 games, and producing a 7.3 WAR in those 130 games. So it felt a lot better knowing that you have somebody that can produce like that at the plate. Whereas this year, you got, I think your home run leader hit 31 in Manny Machado, which is 12 away. But nonetheless, Manny Machado's season this year was just as good as Fernando's last year, both of them having two of the best seasons in Padres history. So that's our MVP, by the way, and that should be the league's MVP. But in terms of where we had them, they did exactly what we thought they needed to do for a very, very long time. And I think they kind of deserve somewhat of a pass, the pitching staff. At least, Joe Musgrove, Sean Manaea, because they did hold us down for a really long time. And it's a little unfair to hold such high expectations for them for so long. I mean, Sean Manaea should have definitely been much better, but Joe Musgrove was very good for a really long time. Now, I did have them in third. For anyone who didn't see Hum Baby Baseball's video that we did together, I had the Dodgers, obviously, Giants second, and the Padres third. And I think in my defense, I think it'd be very hard to find someone who didn't have it in that order, just because the Giants came off such a magical season, and everyone was starting to hail Gabe Kapler as, one of the new best managers in all of baseball. And, he plays his analytics, and everyone was singing the praise for the Giants. I bought into that. It was total bullshit. They went 81-81, and they're one of like 10 teams, I think, to be in have a 100-win season, and then having like an 80-win season and miss the playoffs, something like that. But in terms of, if we were to give a grade to the Padres, and this might sound a little lenient, but I got to give them an A. I really feel like I have to give them an A, because you know what? Coming into the season, obviously for everyone, same circumstances, there was a fat lockout, but I really can't think of, maybe there is a team out there, and somebody please let me know, but I cannot think of a team that took more hits than the Padres before the season. You lost Fernando Tatis after, this whole dramatic thing where he falls off a motorcycle, doesn't tell nobody, and all this kind of stuff happens. And considering the circumstances, they didn't really add anyone except for, I think, Taylor Rogers, and they did add Sean Manaea as well. So they added pitching, but we all knew that the lineup might not be that good. That was the biggest concern. The lineup might not be that good. Nonetheless, the lineup at least held up for basically the whole season, and got us to almost 90 wins. That's kind of the threshold that you want to get to. You want to get to 90 wins. Nonetheless, we got 89, but that still got you the 5th seed. So even in a regular season of baseball, this is a regular season of baseball. You guys know what I'm trying to say. Previous years where there was a 5th seed and no 6th seed, we're still a playoff team. So it's not like, they had an extra spot for us to get in. We got in no matter what. But there was more circumstances. There was Blake Snell not being ready to start the season. There was Mike Clevenger not being ready to start the season. Fernando tested positive for PEDs. Manny Machado missed 2 or 3 weeks. We didn't have Juan Soto the whole season. There was so many. Bob Melvin missed 2 weeks or 3 weeks total this year. There was so many things that added up against the Padres. And in the face of adversity, they are one of the top teams one of the playoff teams in the NL, with everything going right for them coming into October. So, as I said, maybe it sounds lenient, but, and of course, us Padres fans' expectations aren't crazy high because of previous seasons, but there were so many things going against the Padres, and they were able to prevail. And I think that deserves an A.
I like it. And I think going back on it, I think a lot of the stuff with the Giants does make sense, even though when we were listening back on it before we got on, and Isaac goes, he's listening to this phone, he goes, and he's like shocked that he had the Giants in second place, which I thought was hilarious. But no, I think, I don't know if I give them an A just because they're at 89 wins. It wasn't perfect, but I think what you're bringing up in terms of adversity, in terms of not having Fernando in 2 different instances where you thought you were going to get him and then you didn't, and then you thought you were going to get him and then you didn't again. That's a huge blow. I mean, an MVP caliber player, 7 WAR player not being there is really terrible. And I think there's a lot of guys that we can kind of look at and go, hey, this guy was amazing. Manny Machado, of course. We can look at Ha-seong Kim and go, hey, Ha-seong Kim was, an amazing player for the Padres. And, he ends up starting the whole season at shortstop, even though you didn't really expect him to. And And I think a lot of people will look back and be like, "Oh, Jake Cronenworth was disappointing and stuff." I mean, I thought Profar was pretty good, but maybe some people will look at Profar and think he had a disappointing year. But like these guys are still putting up pretty solid numbers. They're both of those guys were really good defensively. I know Profar's defense has fallen off a little bit later on, but for the most part, like a lot of guys played really well outside of like Trent Grisham, who really just like was awful. Like even Austin Noy, I honestly started putting it together towards the end of the season. Like pretty much everyone in the lineup, not like anyone was that good, but in the season, also, what about the fact that the baseballs were dead this year? Like, that's also something that was just completely weird. And then you look at the first, like, 2 months of the season, it's like, oh, look, all of the numbers are the lowest since. And if you ever see this in a stat, you know, like, it's really bad or it's really good, one or the other. Where it's like, yeah, nothing, this has never happened since, 1904. It's like, oh, probably not a good sign if offensive numbers are that terrible. And it was crazy because you were just hearing like these ridiculous stats about how bad league wide the offense was. So I think it also has an impact when I was bringing up like the offense wasn't that good this year. I think that has a pretty big role in it too. But I mean, there's a lot of guys that really stepped up. I would probably give them a B plus, just because they're not a 90 win team, and that was like kind of a number that we had been circulating like a lot of like you got to win 90 games, you got to win 90 games, just because it kind of guarantees that you're in the playoffs. We also saw that the Phillies and the Brewers at the end of the season, they were just trying to see who didn't make the playoffs. I don't know if they're shooting for draft picks or what they're doing, but they're losing every game they possibly can, it seems like. So I think that is another factor. But though the Padres do finish in the 5th spot, I think that they're in a good spot. I'd say you're really confident in 2 of their starters right now. You're decently confident in Musgrove, like not that confident in Clef. But like finishing the year, I think you're finishing on a very strong point. The offense has been a little bit better lately. I definitely feel a little bit more confident than I did a month and a half ago. But overall, I think a B plus is probably my overall grade. I don't think we'll go through like everyone, like the lineup and stuff. But if you're looking, Isaac, if you're looking at like some guys that really stood out in terms of hitting, in terms of pitching, and don't do the starters because we already graded the starters and talked about them in quite a bit of depth like a week ago. So if you guys want to check out that video, we graded all the Padres starting pitch hitters. But in terms of bullpen, in terms of any bats, like who do you think that you would kind of circle? Manny Machado's easy, but outside of Manny.
Yeah, I mean, I know you said don't do starters because we've talked about starters so much, but it can't be ignored that Ha-seong Kim filled in for a 7-WAR player, and he did it very well. So, a lot of props to Ha-seong Kim for stepping in. And yeah, he doesn't provide the power and the I guess the the superstar magnet, the fan magnet, the face of baseball thing that Fernando does, but it doesn't get talked. I truly feel like outside of the Padres fan base, it doesn't get talked about enough how great Ha-seong Kim was this year. A lot of props to him for sure, but Jose Alzocar, I feel like deserves his praise. Jose Alzocar, yeah, he doesn't hit for much power. He's not the flashiest player, but Trent Grisham has been horrendous, and Jose Alzocar stepped in and has provided some quality at bats. He's had some clutch moments, played some solid defense, solid base runner. I mean, I don't see him as a starter in the future. I really don't. But in terms of what he's provided off the bench, I think he's been fantastic. So he deserves his praise. Out of the bullpen, Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez has been one of the best pitchers I can think of out of the bullpen in recent years. I mean, he comes out, and if you need 2 or 3 innings, he gives you 2 or 3 shutout innings, it feels like. If you need 1 inning, he gives you it. If you need him to close, he gives you that. Like, he was such a versatile piece and such a valuable piece of the bullpen that I feel like a lot of people wanted him back in the starting rotation, but you can't really replace what he provides you out of the bullpen. So you needed him in that role. And I think Bob Melvin kind of acknowledged that throughout the season, is that we don't want to take him out because he provides versatility that we need out of the bullpen. So that's somebody that deserves a lot more praise than he gets. And then I will never, ever, ever discount what this guy does, even though his last outing wasn't very well. Tim Hill, obviously started the season very rough, but when we needed him most, come like August 2nd and on, the guy was shut down. I mean, there was almost throughout the whole month of August, you saw 0 earned runs, 0 earned runs, 0 earned runs, 0 earned runs consistently. And he looked, I mean, yeah, he didn't have his best season, but he really did look good come crunch time. So a lot of praise to Tim Hill. And lately, just because this might be his last, we might have seen his last game at Petco Park as a San Diego Padre, Will Myers has looked great his last 15, 20, whatever it is games. You guys know I very rarely give that guy, his praise because I know a lot of people love Will Myers. I haven't been his biggest fan, but lately the guys look fantastic.
Yeah, shout out Will Myers. Chase would probably be all over the Will Myers talk today and the slander that we've given him in the past. I think that you brought it up, but some of the guys in the bullpen deserve a ton of credit. So I'm going to go through the top 6 guys in terms of games pitched for the Padres. I just was kind of looking through some numbers. This is ridiculous, dude. Luis Garcia, 64 games pitched, 61 innings, 3.39 ERA. Okay, how about this? Everyone in this top 6 has over 45 games pitched and like 40 to 60 innings for the most part, unless except outside of Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez is over 100. So they're eating up a large chunk of baseball.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these guys I'm going to bring up, you don't really hear that much. So you brought up Tim Hill. I just brought up Luis Garcia. You brought up Nick Martinez already. 3 other guys on the list: Nabil Crismatt, Steven Wilson, and Robert Suarez. Tim Hill finished with a 3.5 ERA. Nabil Crismatt had a sub-3 ERA. Steven Wilson had a 3.06 ERA. And Robert Suarez had a 2.27. Obviously, ERA is not the only stat to look at. But just looking at in terms of, those are pretty good ERAs. For guys like Steven Wilson isn't like some guy that you're like, oh yeah, I really have a lot of faith in Steven Wilson. But there's so many guys in this team that just did pretty solid. And that's the reason that the Padres are where they are today. And so I think a lot of those guys give credit. You brought up Jose Azocar. I can't believe you didn't bring up Robinson Cano. I mean, come on. But no, I mean, there's a lot of guys. Alfaro, of course, had all the walk-offs. Even Nomar Mazara was hot for a while, dude. There's so many guys like that, and that's what's cool about baseball is you go and you look at okay, well, how many guys were actually on this team? And there's so many more than what the active roster usually is, which I always think is so cool.
Matt Beatty?
I think that's the only guy. I was gonna say, bro, you can give credit to Batten before you give credit to Beatty, man. Come on. But no, I think that's what made the season really cool, is that a lot of guys that were kind of not the best were able to step up and kind of supplement superstar seasons from a few guys. Because if you end up looking at it, I mean, Darvish, amazing. Musgrove, amazing over the course of the season. He had some ups and downs, but he's pretty amazing throughout the whole season. Machado, we've talked about it enough. One other guy I do want to shout out. Honestly, I'll shout out a couple of these guys. A couple guys that were traded. Luke Voit. Shout out Luke Voit. And shout out CJ Abrams. I'm not shouting out the other guys we traded, but those 2 guys, they get a shout out because Luke Voit had some big time moments too. I don't know Abrams didn't, but I think Abrams is going to be really, really good. So, but yeah, I think that's probably it for the overall grades. Unless Isaac, was there anything else you wanted to bring up? Because we're gonna do another video that's gonna be out. If you're listening on YouTube, it's gonna be out in a couple hours. If you're listening on podcast, it'll be out Thursday. Nothing. All right, cool. Well, let us know what your guys' overall team grade was and kind of quick analysis on this team in the comments. And then in probably 2 or 3 hours, I'm going to have an kind of a preview and predictions episode out for the Padres Mets wildcard series, which is going to be awesome. And if you have not listened yet, not heard about this, we're going to be going live every single game in the playoffs. And then we also, the next morning, basically, we'll put a little video out, and this will be in the live stream too, but we'll put a little video out of the keys to victory, basically, that next day. But today we're going to be talking about, this regular season recap, and then, of course, the overall kind of predictions for this Met series. And also kind of talking a little bit of strategy as well with how do you put out your starters? Because DeGrom might be moved to game 3, which makes it very, very intriguing for the Padres. But with that said, I think it's going to do it for this episode today. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon.